All right.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to part two of our interview with David Zsutty. David Zsutty works at the Homeland Institute. He's the executive director. He's also an attorney at law. So we're going to continue with part two of our discussion. So, David, we ended part one of the discussion talking about the Haitian Revolution being a failure. I do think you know the story. So after the revolution, the Haitians secured their independence. France imposed reparations on Haiti. France was a loser, Haiti was victorious, but due to the power dynamics, France imposed reparations on Haiti. Post slavery Asian leaders were racialist and did not understand the workings of a free market economy or a liberal political society. Furthermore, because Haiti was a black country, Haiti was isolated. America refused to acknowledge Haiti's independence until the early 1860s. Asians, blacks were primarily uneducated. Haiti was also divided. In Haiti, we had mulatto. There in Haiti, there were mulattoes, blacks, and whites. It was a divided society. Mulattoes and blacks were not friends. So what were we actually expecting? England 2.0? No. We got Somalia. That's the logical outcome of the Asian Revolution. So the Asian Revolution is lauded. People like to praise it. Oh, Haiti became the first black independent country. Yeah. And I say no. I care more about outcomes than objectives. So the Haitian Revolution failed, and Haiti has been in crisis since 1804 until now. This speaks to the pitfalls of independence. Sovereignty is overrated.
Right. I would say yes at some point. For example, there are folk elements of culture, which is why I value, and then there is the political aspect of it. I think, we can definitely say that we might value all cultures and see a good in all of them, but we can also say that some of them are better at competing and better at getting certain things done, such as creating a society that is low violence, orderly, productive. And at some point, yes, like this was a disaster. A lot of countries, I hate to say it, but once colonialism ended, they kind of reverted to their natural state, which usually wasn't that great. And I like just be blunt about it. And, I don't see any way out of this. I only see ways that could make it worse. But I do think, yes, Western culture does have aspects to it that can be emulated by people who are receptive to it, but they need to want to do it. And right now, it sounds like nobody in Haiti wants to get out of the cycle except maybe you and a few others.
Well, I'm not
And
in
this isn't just
Haiti.
like a white versus black thing. Like the German, the Roman civilization was super. Yeah, sorry, Jamaica. When Rome was at its height, Germany was frankly a little bit primitive. And some of it might have been exaggerated, but the Germanic tribes eventually came to emulate Rome. They got organized, beat the Romans because of this.
Yes.
And they still remain Germans though. So they Romanized, and which kind of meant they Greekified to some extent because the Romans adopted so much Greek culture. But they still remain Goths and Visigoths, and they might have adopted, the Christian religion, but they didn't really change what their nucleus was. And I think you can adopt positive aspects of other cultures and learn from them without completely jettisoning what makes you unique and special.
That's why the West is so dynamic. Westerners are willing to embrace a better worldview. They're not so obsessed with Western culture to the point of becoming idiotic. And back to your point about Roman imperialism, there are actually recent studies touting the positive effects of Roman imperialism in countries like Germany and England. So colonialism is not always bad.
Right. However, there is a danger. The reverse danger too is that the imperializer becomes diluted. At some point, they began, first of us, everyone's becoming Greek and taking on Greek stuff. Then it was Syrian stuff and Eastern mystery cults. Then it became everyone, the legions of the German now. So at some point there is a danger to empires to the imperial power as much as there is to the provinces. And at some point, it wasn't just okay, we're going at some point they adopted so much stuff, whether it was good or bad, where they just weren't the same. They were no longer really properly Roman. Like I can't tell, you can debate endlessly about where the point came where Rome stopped being Roman, but sometime between the Punic Wars, when everyone wanted to go Greek, and the fall of Rome, when all the legions are basically Germans, they were no longer Roman. Like, for example, Oswald Spengler talks about how a lot of the architecture that we associate with the Roman world is actually Syrian. For example, the Parthenon, the huge dome building. I mean, not the Parthenon, the Pantheon, pardon me, that was built and designed by a Syrian, and he goes so far as to call this the first mosque. That's a little bit out there. He's being Spengler, he's being radical, but he had a point to that too, where it simply was different. It wasn't really Roman, even though we think of it as peak Romanness.
That's why one must examine the utility of a culture before adopting it. That's my position. One must temper uh, emotions with logic. But back to the point about Haiti. So Haitians are going to Jamaica, and the Jamaican government is being pressured by human rights activists to grant these people asylum. But this is the logical retort. Jamaica is a struggling country. Even though some quarters say that the economy is slightly improving, it is still a struggling country. Haiti is a struggling country and a low human capital country. Haiti has crime, violence, corruption, the ills plaguing Jamaica. The Haitians are not scholars from Germany or entrepreneurs from America. So when Jamaica imports these Asians, what's Jamaica going to do with them? They can pick coffee. Some of them do pick coffee. They might get other menial jobs, but the better quality Asians are going to American Canada. They're not going to Jamaica. So if Jamaica imports Asians, they're going to strain our resources. And that's a big issue in a country that's literally resource resource scarce based on how they're allocated and efficiency. So I do sympathize with Westerners who want to limit immigration because it makes no sense to just open up your borders to the entire world. And I have stated in that piece that if Asians, because by nature, as a libertarian, I care about economics. So if Asians want to relocate to Jamaica legally to work and study, that's great. But if they relocate to Jamaica illegally, they're going to be deported. And if they're granted asylum, they have to work. They have to go through the process to get their Jamaican documents to start working. They're not going to come here and become idlers or bums like other Jamaicans. That's a big no-no. I'm all about work. I've even stated that if people in Jamaica have a problem with the government deporting Asians back to Haiti, we can always export them to a sanctuary city in America. Let them become your problem. And I'm serious.
It's
The manifest destiny and the Monroe Doctrine. You guys caused it, not me. You became the superpower. Superpower. So let
well,
America become your problem. I mean, let Haiti become your problem.
I can't help but laugh because this reminds me of an incident in Cuba where for the longest time Cuba tried to keep people from leaving, but America created this open borders policy for Cuba to try to lure people out of there. And then Fidel Castro realized I can just flush all my undesirables out of the country into America. So he took all the dissidents and all the people who were like, mentally challenged or handicapped or drunkards and criminals, put them on boats and just shoved them out of America. He then bragged that he had flushed the toilets of Cuba into America. It's one of those things where we're definitely being taken advantage of, but I can't help but laugh at how sometimes the West allows itself to be taken advantage of. It's a tragedy. But if I was Fidel Castro, I would have done the same thing probably. And I think Westerners have to begin to realize that it's a cutthroat world. If you allow yourself to be taken advantage of, you will be taken advantage of. And that's just
And
history in life.
and I would even and David, if you ever read any of my articles?
Unfortunately, I haven't. I am going to look into them though.
Okay.
It looks very interesting.
And if you have been well, people who do follow me, they know that I am logical to an extreme, and I am no walkover. Nobody's going to give me a 6 for a 9. I've even asserted that if America has a problem with Jamaica exporting Asian immigrants to that state, then Americans can pay us to keep them. They can give us, let's say, 35 million US dollars. Pay us to keep them. And I'm serious. I am not a lapdog. If the Jamaican government wants to be a lapdog, great, but I am no lapdog. You guys in America can give us 35 million to keep them, and we're going to take 1,500 immigrants every 2 years. We're not going to take a lot. And whenever we get a new set of immigrants, we get an extra 2 million, and that's separate from the 35 million. And I'm serious.
That's interesting. So that does hit a issue that I want to
I'm
hit
not a
on really quick.
lapdog. Sorry, I'm not a
No, no,
lapdog.
you're not. I can tell that. But here's an issue is that a lot of countries, they simply go straight to America and bypass all the countries that are similar to them in culture and or race. And there's a huge issue here where we call it the fake UG, the fake asylum seeker, where you have these people, disproportionately military-aged men, sometimes women and children, who claim they are asylum seekers because they're being hated on in their host country. And they go, and the rules for asylum seekers is that you stop at the first country. I know you're talking about economic immigrants mostly, but it segues naturally into this point. You have these fake UGs who are fake refugees who claim they're being hated on at risk of political imprisonment and death and all this. Well, you're supposed to stop at the first safe country you reach, and that's usually, and they usually skip all these countries along the way and just go straight to America. It's like Monopoly. It's like you go straight to go and collect your $200. And we need to just harden up and, say no. And part of it might be I am open. I am very much pragmatic. I think maybe bribing other countries to take immigrants for us isn't something I'm opposed to. I am opposed to this whole idea that we pay money to foreigners at all like that. But if it's a tough road and if we are running low on solutions and we are desperate, that's not, it might actually save us money, because in her book, Adios America, Ann Coulter explained how each immigrant actually costs America a lot more money in welfare and crime on average than any type of putative gain towards wages or Social Security. In fact, the whole immigration thing it's part of it is to change the electoral college here and change our demographics and therefore change the votes. You fortify an election that way, but it's also the Social Security pyramid scheme. I'm not saying that old people shouldn't collect Social Security or be paid for their hard work or be taken care of, but a lot of this goes to fund a program that is simply not feasible. It's a Ponzi scheme, and it's just to keep Social Security held up, but the net cost, which gets burdened onto future generations with debt, usually to the Chinese, it's extraordinary, and it's not sustainable by any definition.
But don't worry, David. America is a lapdog with economic clout, and many of our peers in developing countries are also lapdogs. So there's this tendency to defend fake sovereignty by criticizing countries like America and England, but most of these critiques are premised on a lapdog rhetoric. Classic example is anti-money laundering. Anti-money laundering is the most ineffective public policy. And this is not my opinion. This is a statement that I read in an academic journal. It's an ineffective public policy. According to the World Bank, anti-money laundering regulations, they hurt the poor. And for the most part, most people are not laundering money. If you want to launder money, you're going to go to Switzerland, Liechtenstein, or somewhere in England. They're not going to launder money in Africa or the Caribbean. But because of their geopolitical clout, countries in North America and Europe, they craft anti-money laundering regulations for the rest of the world, and they put some developing countries on a gray list. So Barbados was once on a gray list. And I'm saying low taxes incentivize economic growth and innovation. This is a popular Western idea. I don't care about the race to the bottom. A country should have control over tax policy. Capitalism should be based on competition. If the Americans or the English are so obsessed with extracting resources, then they should target their own people in those spaces. Don't extend their power to Jamaica or somewhere in Barbados because, as I've stated before, AML regulations are inexpensive, they don't work, they're anti business. But what do Jamaican politicians do? They comply with them. They do. They comply with anti money laundering regulations that are insensible and then pontificate about the effects of colonialism and slavery. Colonialism and slavery both ended in Jamaica a long time ago.
Right. I think that kind of plays into the whole issue of unironically Western imperialism because right now it's not, give us your sugar or whatever. It's more of like ideological imperialism. And this all comes down to the State Department, which is infested with liberals, women, what I call affluent white female liberals. I'm not anti-women or anything, but there is a very feminine energy to how the State Department operates, where they simply believe these memes about how they're going to basically save the world. They can't, think you can't really address culture. They definitely can't address racial issues. So they have to think if we simply get them to stop laundering money, there might be some subversive thing going on here. I don't know. Like I think these people are all involved in very shady schemes. So maybe it's so no certain people cannot launder money, but they can. That's merely speculation. I don't trust them. But a lot of it is simply they believe these memes about how if these wise liberals can bring their Enlightenment philosophy and their progressive values to the whole world with feminism and all this, well, along with feminism, you also get anti-money laundering, and they're making an issue out of something that wasn't an issue. For example, in the Middle East, they made an issue out of women voting, and it's like this wasn't a thing for them. This is wholly new. Well, anti-money laundering is new to the Caribbean world, and they're coming in from their ivory tower from along the Potomac to boss people around. And one of the things I was in the Air Force, I was an airborne linguist, so I had to learn a language, and part of learning a language is the cultural competency. And ironically, these people who I assume like to travel, they think of themselves as being all cultural and world people, citizens of the world. They have absolutely zero cultural competence. They don't I understand that maybe different places are totally different. And there's a saying different strokes for different folks. You know, anti-money laundering might just be a waste of time and money for the Caribbean, or maybe, and so they're trying to be these but Oswald Spengler would decry as world improvers and basically silly people, and they're just being ineffectual or even worse, making it worse. And part of it comes down to is that the West, there is this tendency towards universalism, and so where that comes from, it could come from Catholicism, it could come from what Spengler calls Faustianism, it could come from the Enlightenment. There's a lot of sources we could debate where this comes from, but it seems to be very baked into the cake. And it's ironically a bad idea to try to impose these ideas on people who just it's simply ludicrous.
But the non-West is governed by lapdogs, eco-imperialism. You don't really hear African or Caribbean politicians talking about eco-imperialism. They all tout the climate hysteria promulgated by the left in the States. None of them are saying, well, the climate is always changing and we are not a large contributor to carbon emissions. They never say so. They listen to Greta Thunberg.
Right. I think that's another issue is that there's these weird, so part of it is that they do actually believe these ideas. The other part is that there's a lot of monetary incentives. And the whole thing here, my pet peeve about this talk of climate stuff is that rich people in America, they'll pontificate about the climate, but then they'll have all this beachfront property in Malibu or the Hamptons or wherever. And so if climate change is real, if it's as horrible as they say it is, they would have sold their stuff. That would be dirt cheap. Those would be going to homeless people, not to celebrities, not to BML founders that have like these complicated properties and all that. And the two of lapdogs, it's true. I think there is something about liberal democracy that creates lapdog leaders who are more followers than leaders. And unironically, pushing democracy is bad because it creates weak leaders. I think democracy at some point needs, if it works, it's going to be very conservative. It's going to be nationalistic. And right now, democracy just means rule by the rich because what is the most influential thing in elections? Money. Your campaign chest. I mean, Trump seemed to have broken that, which is why they hate him so much. But the traditional rule of political science is that money wins elections more than anything else. And a lot of these climate people, like the World Economic Forum, they incentivize this. And part of it might be because they have ulterior motives in
They're
the
in the
Caribbean, but part
renewable.
of it is to also create worldwide hysteria so that all these silly white liberals in the West look at this and say, we're killing the Caribbeans, we're killing the Haitians and Jamaicans, they're all going to die. Nothing ever happens, of course, but if your leaders get on board with this, it reinforces its echo chamber across the whole world.
The climate is always changing. With or without us, the climate will change. The effects of climate change are not uniform. CO2 positively correlates with agricultural fertilization, and conflict is less frequent during warmer times. CO2 emissions also predict economic growth. Developing countries need higher levels of CO2 emissions to attain parity with the West. And the latter point is from an academic study. CO2 leading to warming doesn't make it a pollutant. It's just like it's like deep sea mining. Deep sea mining is the latest target of these climate idiots. So they they want to engage in the production of renewables. Deep sea mining is promoted as an alternative because it's not as toxic. However, they say we can't dabble in deep sea mining because we don't know what's in the deep sea. It doesn't matter that studies are showing that deep sea mining is a feasible alternative, or that the Economist magazine is lauding deep sea mining. The evidence doesn't matter. What matters is how these people feel. Remember, they're the ones proposing renewables, and we build renewable technology by engaging in mining. And renewable mining is energy intensive and it's mineral intensive. So it's costly and pollutes the environment. We have scientists and engineers have discovered an alternative route to achieving renewable technologies. And what do they say? We can't mine in the deep sea because we don't know what's in it. Well, you're going to know what's in the deep sea by exploring it.
Right. They won't even try anything. It's what way I look at it is that they already have their answer. They're simply creating post hoc rationalizations for it. And the whole thing I think about the climate thing is simply to deindustrialize the West to carry out white genocide, because some of the people in our government have an ethnic animus towards the white majority that's centuries old. I won't go too much into that, but part of it is that, deep sea mining, it's just the most green energy is actually nuclear, but they
Yes.
trick the Greens into thinking that it's horrible because it simply sounds scary. It's not if you do it right and you have competent people. And the problem here is that the whole renewable thing is fake
It's not energy.
because
Green energy is not real energy. It's
no,
backed
it's
by
it's
fossils.
yeah, and the whole thing about renewables is that solar panels are highly toxic actually. And two, the whole wind energy thing, well, wind blades are usually disposed and they're huge and they kill birds. And the whole thing, it just sounds nice on paper. It makes these like silly liberal soy boys in the city feel good. And the whole thing too is that this whole environmentalism comes from people usually in urban settings. I'm not saying that urban people shouldn't be concerned about the environment, but for them, it's a very abstract theoretical thing most of the time. This is just for virtue signaling. I don't think they could ever admit to themselves as how abstract, and they really have less of a dog in this fight than people who are rural or live close to stuff. You know, and two, if they were really worried about pollution, I do believe in ecology. I am environmental because I think a nation is its blood plus its soil. So we want to take care of the environment. We want our people to live in a nice country. But if you were really concerned about the environment, you'd be pushing for nukes. And two, you'd be telling China and India to stop polluting. almost all the 10, I think all of the 10 top most polluting rivers are almost all of them come from China and India. But they get a free pass. And I think this whole climate stuff is simply to deindustrialize Western countries so that they can basically lower white birth rates and carry out the great replacement, do the ethnic animus. And two, it's like the whole thing about solar panels. There's a lot of, government subsidies for this. A lot of it is just graft. It's just corruption, basically. And I know we were talking about corruption earlier and how the Caribbean world is so corrupt and other countries are so corrupt, but I think right now, Western hyper-capitalist, subverted economies are corrupt in their own way, but they're more discreet about it. It might be through government. It's not like, gangs coming to your place and hitting up for money or having to like grease somebody's palms at the local office. But there is just as much corruption in the West, it seems like. It's just done more tidier and more politer and less violently. But like the taxpayer pays for these subsidies to all these things which are not economically or environmentally feasible because it's a meme of being green.
Yeah, I'm laughing because it's, well, non-Westerners could be lapdogs because they're being bribed by Western states, but we just don't know. Or maybe they're lapdogs because they're naturally stupid. But either way, the non-Western world is headed by primary lapdogs who think that they're revolutionaries.
Well, that sounds like the GOP, the Republican Party in America. So I think we're in the same boat here. I think we found some, despite different race, despite different culture, we found something we can definitely agree upon. We are led by lapdogs.
Yeah, they're lapdogs. I'm a Jamaican. I think that politicians on both sides of the aisle are just lapdogs. They don't serve a point. The country won't. These are not the people who can take a country to the promised land. And those expecting otherwise are just infinitely stupid. And I'm being serious. I'm not being hyperbolic any at all. I have
Well,
no.
no, they can't deal with the big issue here is that along with not being able to take their country or their respective country to the future is that these world leaders and politicians in white countries and non-white countries, they can't even deal with a crisis, it seems like. I'm not sure if you have more perspective on the non-white world, but it seems like in America, every part is that they do want a crisis so they can do their dirty work, like with COVID lockdowns, the Great Reset, but they just seem genuinely incompetent at times. Part of it is malice, but a lot of it does seem to be pure incompetence. Where they, for example, I don't know where you stand upon this. I know it's a highly contentious issue, but the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I'm frankly embarrassed with how the West has not been able to resolve this. This would have never happened under President Trump. But Biden, he is weak. All they know how to do is basically it's the American tactic of throwing money at a problem and hoping it will go away. And it has been working. And I think we've gotten a lot of good Ukrainians killed by very poorly thought out policies. I mean, the moment the war started, someone should have been the adult in the role and said, we have a deindustrialization problem. We cannot outshell the Russians. We need to create more shells. We need to find a way to do this ASAP. But they just kind of make loud noises and print more money. These people, I think, in any other time period, I think there's something about the modern world or democracy that selects for crappy leaders. Part of it is subversion. A lot of countries are controlled by international finance, and they like to, they like a state that's soft and pliable for their machinations. But you look at these people, they would have never been able to lead it. They wouldn't have been field marshals in a previous era or statesmen or politicians. In ancient Athens, they would have been laughed at. They would
Exactly.
not have lasted in the Renaissance. These people are just grossly incompetent and sad.
It's government by emotions, or as you aptly said, government by feminist values. I don't have a problem with women being ambitious, but I'm a data-driven guy, and there are some studies asserting that the involvement of women in the political arena has increased the size and scope of government. These studies are debated, these studies are debatable, but what I do know is that women are less supportive of free speech than men. And according to PNAS, they are not as systematic and rational. So I doubt that importing more women into politics will add any great value. What will happen if if more women become politicians? Then we'll just continue to fixate on stupid social issues.
Right. And also just like virtue signaling and hysteria. Like if you look at all the climate hysterics, the climate extinction people, whenever they go trash a beautiful work of art at a museum, it's like 95% plus women who are doing this.
They're
And it's just bizarre
unstable,
behavior.
they're unstable liberal women, and a high percentage of liberal women aren't stable.
Right. And part of the problem isn't just like women having women issues, it's that men have become very womanly too. Like we have the soy boy phenomenon in the West. There's declining testosterone. I know Tucker Carlson did a a segment on this called like the end of men or something.
What
And
men?
this is a
The
huge
end of
issue
men.
where,
Okay.
yeah, the big issue here is that, men used to be able to like, even if you involved women in politics in previous decades, they could be kind of led by men.
Yes.
But now it's like the women are leading the men, or the men have just become worse than women in this regard. And I'm not bad mouthing women. I like women. I think they're an important part half of any nation.
Of course,
I
they
think
socialize
there's
children.
but
They
yeah,
socialize children. That's why they're super important.
yeah, they're essential, and I do respect and love them. But there's this huge issue where feminine energy or feminine thought patterns shouldn't be in politics. There's a lot of zero-sum games, a lot of logic, and a lot of them get hysterical. A lot of men, and I'm not just talking about the transgender ones, but they are basically women now. They're hysterical, they're silly, and they're weak, and they're not logical. And, they can't provide their girlfriend or significant other or wife this direction. So everyone just becomes floofy and silly, and we all have to wear masks now because someone might get the sniffles. And just it's a disaster. And I do think restoring masculinity and traditional gender roles where women are free to be themselves and be women, and men are free to be themselves and be men and complement each other is essential. This is a huge issue in the West. And part of this too is going back to like the West kind of like, lifting countries up, is that there's a lot of stuff, if we try to do that, that other countries might get, which are disastrous. For example, I'm not sure if this is purely due to feminism, but right now, the last time I checked, the only country in Latin America that has above replacement level birth rates is Guatemala. Part of this is probably economic, but part of it could be cultural. And I fear if if the West gets involved with trying to uplift other countries, any good we could give might be tainted by some of the bad that will inherently creep along out of the State Department with all these crazy ideas. And it just seems so baked in the cake because State Department is full of radical feminists, academia, these people who try to get involved with international stuff are usually very leftist. And so we're just going to backfire. All we'll do is tank their birth rates. And at that point, I think a country can remain itself and be health and survive and be healthy with slightly below level replacement rates, but a precipitous collapse is bad. This leads to issues like in South Korea, where it's cutthroat, it's an Asian society, it's senile. North Korea is going to conquer the South, simply by outweighting them and letting their population collapse. It's like if the North Korea had unleashed a biological weapon that sterilized them all. Like it's very ironic that the West has done more to weaken South Korea to an invasion from the North than the North Koreans ever could have done.
Yeah, it's really laughable. It's funny, but it's real life. And sometimes I do appreciate humor in real life. Now we're going last point on Western foreign policy. Western diplomats used to talk about trade liberalization, energy, serious issues. Now they talk about climate change and women. So if I were a politician in Jamaica, I would have no reason to engage a Canadian or an American diplomat.
Correct. In fact, there are some countries that are basically fed up with this. I believe Niger, there was a coup there. There's concerns because Niger, I think, contributes about a third of France's uranium. And there is talk about intervention against the military junta in power there. And one of the local officials, I forget his name and exact position, but he basically told Newland that instead of basically America threatened to cut Niger's funding and all the foreign aid they get. And they said, why don't you use that money to get Newland on a diet so she's less fat? They're openly mocking this silly liberal woman. And that's what we're at. It's like at some point,
Yeah.
America, the West is not taken seriously. And this is Like I'm glad our ideas are being these horrible ideas are being rejected because I am pro-white. I am focused on my own people, but I don't hate anybody. I don't want any, all things being equal, I'd rather that Africa not be infected with crazy ideas and destroyed. But at the same time, it's like our empire is collapsing and there will be issues with Russia and China, which are not pro-white countries by a long shot. China is very hostile, very dangerous, sweeping on in and picking up the pieces. So it's a tragedy. It's dangerous, but it is also comical in a way.
Yeah. No, I view Ukraine as part of Russia's realm of influence, but this war has been a mammoth failure and an embarrassment to all parties. I just
Right.
want it to be over. But last point, we're going before we wrap up, birthright citizenship. I don't endorse that any at all.
No, me neither. I think that was a huge issue with America. Like I think I mentioned earlier where we had three separate foundings. Well, the other constitutional founding were the Civil War amendments, and I'm probably gonna write a whole article on this actually. But the Civil War amendments were passed to basically stamp out slavery forever, so that you couldn't, mix the labels up and basically do it. But nobody on the North or the South, even the most radical people in the North, intended this to be open game. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry can just come to America and get citizenship here because they had a baby. And then the baby gets citizenship and the parents, that was never the legislative intent. And there's a question about the 14th Amendment being valid at all because it was achieved through coercion. But even if we look past that, no, even the North would not have intended that. Lincoln, his successors, even the most vicious people in Reconstruction did not want to create this loophole that would explode decades later into replacing the native-born white population. A lot of the anti-slavery sentiment was that they didn't want, a multiracial society going out westward. They didn't want slavery or blacks moving out west. And so, I mean, Lincoln had plans to ideally repatriate them to Africa. So the 14th Amendment has been completely abused. It was essentially overkill to make sure that there's no sneakiness of slavery inching back into society, which was, I am opposed to slavery. That was a good goal. It was a laudable goal, but it was overkill and it's backfired. And no, I don't, birthright citizenship has been a disaster and doesn't make sense
It doesn't
one
make any
bit.
sense. It doesn't make any sense.
It's
Asians,
convenient though.
the
It's convenient
Asians
for globalists.
who have babies in Jamaica should go back home to Haiti, and their babies should not be seen as citizens of Jamaica. I don't support birthright citizenship, but being the lapdogs that they are, Jamaican politicians will not update immigration laws. So, like you, I'm also headed by lapdogs, but they just don't know it.
Right. And I do need to make something clear on the record and have some friendly disagreement. I know you said that you thought Ukraine was, more of the Russia sphere. I respect your opinion on that, but my opinion is no, Ukraine is its own thing, and a country gets to determine whose sphere it's in. And right now, the Ukrainians are voting with their bullets to not be part of Russia. I think it's very brave. I think it's unfortunately suicidally brave at this point, and the war should end ASAP. But I reject the notion that Russia has some type of claim on most of Ukraine. They might have some areas in the east, but that's like a few slivers. And this whole notion that they get to basically slap Ukraine around and invade them is ridiculous. And this would not have happened under President Trump because we were strong then. We do not have a lapdog senile president who just kind of
Yes.
wanders around.
And who end this statement by saying, God save the Queen.
I know. God save the Queen, ma'am. Come on, Jack.
Yeah,
I made
like,
a joke on Twitter, like if someone needs to basically, he likes ice cream, so get some ice cream, make it coffee ice cream, like Java cappuccino ice cream, load it up with caffeine. Maybe that way he'll stay awake.
yes. But fortunately, well, not that I care, but finally, he's talking about his other granddaughter.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it was great being on, and you
Yes.
sound like you're a very, very intelligent person. I love meeting you, and I'd like to be back one day. So this is great. I really like talking with you.
All right. It's always a pleasure. And I like Greg Johnson. He's really eloquent.
Ah, thank you. He's a great guy to work with. I like
Yeah,
working with
yeah.
him. He
A lot of people don't like Greg, but he's eloquent, and I like smarts. He's really eloquent. I had him on my show some time ago. Really eloquent.
thanks. I'm sure he'll appreciate
Yeah,
that.
bye.
All right, you have a great day.
You too.